All right, how are we doing? It's me, Challenge with you, Professor. It's almost it, it's almost a crime to stop, eruption in the middle, like near the ending of its performance. So yes, that's Eddie Van Halen performing "Eruption" from Van Halen's debut album, coming out in the late 1970s. Was like, well, actually the early 1970s. But in any case, how are we doing? We're going to talk about the aesthetics of rock, and I was like trying to figure out what I wanted to, what musical examples that we could listen to kind of get things going. And the section that we're going to actually focus on in the article is, just so you can get it under your wraps, is actually section 3, rock music aesthetics. And I realized where I remembered the name Grosix. It's from his book Rhythm and Noise, and I like digested that thing like, exclusively, but I hadn't read it in so many years that when the author finally dropped the name, I was like, that's where I know this guy. And it like came like a floodgate. You ever had that happen to you? It's like, boom, all of a sudden it's like somebody mentions something, or you have like a recall memory, and it's like all of a sudden like everything comes shooting back at you. Yeah, I had that kind of moment when I read the title of the book, Rhythm and Noise. It's an awesome book. It's not really that thick. I mean, you can't get through it in a week, so don't even try. Um, but it's an awesome book, and it's really, what is this, it's like under 200 pages, but there's no way you can get through it all because it's so dense. It's dense, but it's an awesome exploration of it. But this author brings up and talks about, aesthetics in rock, and what is rock aesthetics. And that's an argument that is, almost as old as the foundations and kind of understanding of what rock music is in and of itself. Is it, how is it that you make the distinction? Because one of the questions that I'm probably going to pose to you all is that, where is the fine line between what is rock music and what is heavy metal? And what is the fine line then? Let's tease this out even further. What is the fine line between rock music, which you might even classify as classical rock music, or a quote unquote standardized rock music, and alternative rock music, and then what would be then considered heavy metal? Where is that line of discourse with it? And I have to tell you, I just finished writing a very huge. It took me like 2.5 days to get through it, and I didn't think it was going to. But the research was just astronomical. An article on heavy metal, and I'm not going to give it to you all because it's actually for a specific publication. I can't give it to you. But if you go to any of my social media sites, you'll find the link. I'll just leave it at that. But man, the hours that I spent listening and reading and studying things and whatnot, to go into it. I mean, the sleepless hours, it was incredible. And so the question kept coming back is like, well, where's the fine line? Because we know when you cross it, What does it mean to go into it? And then the aesthetic value. And aesthetics, if you don't know what the word means, is like, what's the nature that makes it up? What's the ajou? What's the fabric? What's the feeling, the emotion that it gives you? So when you say something has a certain aesthetic quality, you're saying that it has a certain it conjoles a certain emotional response inside of you. And it can, and so that could be positive, it could be negative, it could be lukewarm, it could be, whatever it is, and it's going to change over time. Your values, relationships, and things are going to change. So think about it. You know, when did you start enjoying something that's, now that you didn't before? Or when did you, just um, uh, gain a large sense of disdain for something now that you used to really, really enjoy? I'll give you a foreign example, and this is going to be a weird one, but why not? I mean, when John Mayer first came out, I was just like, all right, I get it, and didn't really have any kind of feeling. But it wasn't until a moment in my life happened and dropped on me, and Why Georgia came on the radio. And I'm dating myself, if you know, because it's like, I was driving, and and that song came on, and it was a new release from him. And I mean, there's no hidden agenda that, I'm well past my middle ages. But any case, um and that song came on, and I was in a kerfuddle with things that were happening in my life that was crumbling around me. And that song changed my perspective on listening to John Mayer. And then, and this, and this is his first, album that came out. But his live stuff, I can deal with it. But once he starts covering, I'm not even gonna mention, when he starts doing these weird covers, and then, with his breakup with Taylor Swift and whatnot, yeah, whatever. Then I was kind of like, all right, dude, let's give me something else. Um, but then, but that's a prime example. It's like, I totally discredited it. I gave him some, value and credit. Taught a bunch of his stuff, and when I was, teaching history of rock, and and rock music and rock discourse, at the time, specifically when that album came out, and then turned away from it completely. No, I'm just kidding. But in any case, so you see what I mean? So aesthetics is your relationship. It can change, it's going to change, it's dynamic, it's fluid, it's flexible, and it's not standardized. But the argument comes back to is that, okay, if we understand that your relationship to rock and rock music, and specifically since we're talking about heavy metal in this week, and what are the purveyors and that leads up to heavy metal, we have to take a look at then what hard rock is going into it. So then what makes rock hard rock? That's why, so we have to classify then what is the origins and the inception of, the development, the beginnings of just of rock music itself. So what does that mean? And how does that relate to things? So there's all of these relationships that, that come into the standard fold. uh, my audio is dying, so here we go. Listen. Okay. Okay. So it's, what things really lead up to making and discerning what is, credible rock music, a rock music aesthetic, and then what makes, a heavy metal aesthetic, and then what makes an alternative or a hard rock music aesthetic, because all those things can be different depending on where you are. And that's why I even went back to our very first discussion with it. And I said, depending on, on your relationship to this, some of the music you're going to enjoy, some of it you're not. The other example I'm going to play is from a Japanese duo, The Ruins, and it's just drum and bass. And they do a medley, and it's really short. It's actually shorter than Eddie Van Halen's. Well, it's about the same length as his Eruption solo. And I'm going to drop these two in the notes for you, so that way you have them. But they walk you through a whole litany. It's a medley, so it's a bunch of different song samples all tied together, played in sequence. You could even like as since the winter season is coming up, like Christmas carols, where you're seeing like little bits and pieces of a bunch of different Christmas songs. That's a medley. When you have a lot of different samples of songs all tied together, they do a medley of hard rock, and it's just drums and bass. And you would never know it when you listen to it. And we're going to listen to it, listen to part of it. And then I'm going to drop it to you, because that band is just amazing. And they're classified as a punk band. but they do all of these, crazy, pyrotechnics with their stuff. So for me, the aesthetic value is like really high, but see, that's an educated, perspective in looking at it. Other cats who are into the rock genre and or punk, are going to look at them and give them a different aesthetic coding. So where and what are the values and the lines, and who's to say what is right and who is to say what is wrong? So let's jump into the article really quick, where it talks about the beginning of it. Here's it is right at the very beginning, where he quotes, Bruce Bow, where he says he poses the question, "Can there be an aesthetic of rock music?" That's the same question that I was just dropping on us. And this started in 1993, but man, this goes, on forever. And then he starts talking about Kant, Kant, the philosopher. And I'm really deep, and I mean, I have a degree in, in philosophy. So, a, a secondary master's in a doctoral degree in philosophy. So, yeah, I'm pretty deep with Kant, and I spent a mini an hour and a slice of pizza, reading his stuff. Um, but then he goes on to his taste of, aesthetics and his judgment for them that distinctively, falls upon the relationship and its sense of beauty. But then beauty is subjective, and so, the question that's bringing up is that, and here it is at the bottom of page 5. Under this section where it says, quote, "For Kantian inspired formalists, ensuring the aesthetic judgments are not merely subjective," that's what I just mentioned, "but are rather based on a pleasure that could be had by all, requires that they be disinterested, that is, made independently of extrinsic considerations such as sensuous, emotional, or other non-strictly aesthetic interests." So you can't say something is just pleasant and beautiful, therefore it's credible and has, qualifying aesthetics, because what some people, appreciate, others, are not going to appreciate. So you can't say that, and that's a disturbance, and really, creates an issue and a problem. And so how do we move beyond those limitations? And that's why I brought up what I did at the very beginning, when we started all these conversations, saying that, maybe you have a distaste for this, but that doesn't discredit it, because one person's set of aesthetics, do not override another. And then they bring it up in relationship to classical music, which we always go back to Western European art music. It's like, those are the foundations of it. If you can agree with it or disagree with it, musicologically, there you are. So, um so the point being is that we have to, I love this, we have to quote Chern. Oh, here it is. When it comes to rock music, this is at the bottom of page 5. It says, quote, "When it comes to rock music, which aims to elicit the kinds of physical and emotional responses typically regarded as marginalized or irrelevant to the composition or evaluation of classical music, he thinks this is about thinks that Kantian formalism is inherently ill-equipped." I would agree. And it continues. "Instead, as an aesthetic of rock, he argues, requires, quote, turning Kantian or formalist aesthetics on its head." Perfect. And here we go. Quote, "A theory sustainable for responsive to the aesthetical relevant features of rock music has to acknowledge the material, as opposed to the formal elements of music, such as rhythm, notational expressivity, and loudness." And loudness is the first one that we always go to, right? Because that's the visceral nature of it. So, what is the philosophical and the relationship and the beauty of rock? And if I was to even drop it on you, I would say that it would be the phenomenological application in your response to it. And you're going to say, like, what? That's just a big word that has way too many syllables, and I don't know what you're talking about. Okay. Phenomenology is its meaning and its context and its relationship that you have. It's the momentary excitement that it brings to you. What is the phenomena of your immediate action? So think of it like this: you're at a coffee shop, you're waiting in line, and your phenomenological experience is, goes from you standing in line to you ordering your coffee or your drink to getting your beverage and then experiencing it by taking it in. All of those are different phenomenological moments. You equate them as just going through, getting from, point A to point C, but all of those different motions and places along the line give you a different sense of space, place, and relationship to your context and environment. And your understanding and recognition of them is your phenomenological or your phenomena that you experience as a lived entity in that space and place. That is, if I want to continue it, influenced by the relationship that you have. So when you go, if you and I were in a line at a coffee shop to buy our favorite beverage of the morning to try to get ourselves going, you're going to order. You have in your mind what it is you're going to order. I'm going to have in mind what I'm going to order, but I'm also listening to the music. So our phenomenological experiences are different. I know what I want to order, but I'm listening to the music because I don't have to think about the drink. You might be wondering about, are you going to buy the drink, or, are you going to get a pastry with it? How much money do you have? You have to put gas in your car. Did I do the assignment? I forgot. What day of the week is it? You see what I mean? All of those that's your phenomenological experience just by standing in line. It's your thoughts, right? But it's the depth and the level of your thoughts that go to. So when you listen to music, you're not listening to it as a passive listener. You actually are engaging it on an aesthetic and a phenomenological perspective based upon all these things that are relevant to it. And then one of the things that jumps out at you that you either code as being pleasant or unpleasant is it goes right back to then not just the nature of the rhythm and the structure and the formality of it, but it's going to be the loudness. How well do you perceive it? And if you notice, this will be a real good one for you. The next time you go to your proverbial coffee, favorite coffee shop to get whatever beverage it is you're going to have, notice when the music changes its volume. It only changes it when you perceive it. It hasn't changed on the volume per se, for argument's sake, but it changes its perception once you perceive it. So it becomes louder and more present in your sound space once you recognize and understand it. Same thing with rock music. Once you perceive it and you entertain it as being pleasant, in your vocabulary, your listening vocabulary, your lexicon of sound, then it has a more prominent position. When you don't, you diminish it becomes diminutive. You reduce it. You don't want to hear it. As a matter of fact, you go as far as to like never wanting to turn on or adjust adjust your dials, if that's the case, or your feed or whatever it is, your playlist, to go to any of those musics. You don't. And so that's the relationship, to what's going on phenomenologically, with this side of music. And then dealing with the aesthetics of music is a really, really big different issue. And so he goes on here on page 6 where he says, quote, a clean separation between rock and classical music aesthetics seems complicated by the simple fact that rock draws extensively on the structural elements of classical music. No kidding. And we just continue. At the same time, rock music emerges in large part as explicit rejection of musical traditions, including the classical. So it is equally difficult to dispense with the intuition that rock music should be evaluated by different aesthetic standards. Rock music integrates, appropriates, and reinterprets elements of classical music in a way that suggests that we not abandon formalist aesthetics entirely for an aesthetic of rocks. Perhaps what is required is not an altogether different set of criteria for evaluating rock music, here it is, but a way of evaluating common musical elements differently. And he goes on and talks about the overlap with them, which is all of these different things that I just brought up to you. Yeah, it was all the stuff that I was just, giving you the background of the conversation to. It's your relationship to it, it's your understanding to it, and your knowledge. And so then the more depth and breadth you have of music and music's history and relationship, then you actually can start ascribing those, if you will, structures, elements, and definitions of that music and its aesthetic value to you, to other musics that you relate to. So for me, it's just on a personal level, it's binding and tying together the elements of hip-hop, punk, and rock music, specifically hard rock, alternative rock. But then those are the foundations for it, because then I see the credible relationship where rock would be the founding, central centrifugal force inside of it. They would actually give relationship to hip-hop, and it gives its relationship to punk music. And that's the way, and in my listening discourse and where it goes to, and I relate everything from it. And you get that from a cat who grew up, playing Brahms. So he goes on and talks about things, and then he mentions, Grosky's, Rhythm and Noise, which is just an awesome book. in this whole bottom section here, the last two paragraphs on page 6, you need to read, because it's in this last one, quote, the thrust of Gramsci's argument is that this noise is an aesthetic expression quality of rock music. For example, rock music is loud, but loudness is more than just volume, as amplification affects its timbral quality of instruments, adding brightness, tonal variations to guitars, bass, and thickness to percussion, and so on. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is why we opened up with Eruption. Now, take all of this stuff that we just talked about, and we're going to listen to the Ruins. Okay, I'm gonna play this thing on you. It's about 2 minutes and 33 seconds. So we're gonna jump into it and then tear it apart on its aesthetic value and level, and its relationship to the qualifications of rock and rock history, rock music, and the discourse that we're talking about and unfolding here is that, is there an aesthetic relationship to rock? Because we're still trying to find the proverbial unicorn. Is there a line in distinction between rock, alternative, or heavy or hard rock, and heavy metal? Because we're looking at metal this week, but what makes it go from there? Once you're immersed in the genre, we know what it is, but where's the line change? Check this out. This is just a drum and bass. Okay, hold on. Okay, that's just insane. And I mean, I have to tell you, I mean, I saw them play live once, and it was at a punk club. My mouth just dropped, and there was a piano player, a keyboardist that I was working with a lot at the time. But man, we were doing all kinds. We toured, yeah, we toured half of the world together. Not fully. We didn't make it all the way around, but about half of the world together as a duo. And when he said that the Ruins are coming to town, I was just like, "Are you kidding me?" And we went, and they showed up with their mothers. Okay, they were on tour with their moms. and there's these little Japanese ladies, and the bass player, not only were his biceps like like something chiseled out of a Masters of the Universe, but I mean his hands were just like astronomical, and the guy was like like 4'11". I mean, he was a tiny guy, but when he took out his bass and he just did his warm up, the entire punk club like shut up. Everybody went quiet just to listen to him warm up. It was amazing. And then the drummer did the same thing. He actually broke a set, and they had to bring in a second set for him. And it was just the two of them, and it's all memorized. That's the most impressive. Okay, so as you want to go back to this, see what I mean? I could nerd out on this stuff all day long. This is like one of my favorite, up there, because this aesthetically for me is pleasing because it hits on all these different levels. It's a codification in a relationship of the knowledge of rock history. They present it in an extraordinarily highly prolific musical structure and status. It's clean to a whistle. They actually do it live. There's no overdubbing. Period. They don't overdub anything, and if they don't play it live, if they can't play it live on the record, they never play it, live in person. And I have yet of all of their records, and I used to have all of them. I used to. They never overdubbed anything. And when they played with the choir and they took the choir on tour with them, the choir had to do all of these things live. It was amazing, amazing to hear. So aesthetically, it hits on all these levels and keys, but so did Van Halen's, so did Eddie Van Halen's uh, Eruption. Oh, where is it? Oh man, I just lost it. Okay, hold on a second. I want to go back, see if I can find it. I gotta get it back. Ah, that's bad. Where's my search? Oh, where was it? There we go. I want to get back, to hear that because it does exactly the same thing. He presents a prowess and an aesthetical, relationship there. And the reason I chose this one also is because he does play, some clips from of musical, classical musical, especially guitar, guitar studies inside of the work. So hold on, I got to go back because it started without me. Okay, so just as I know, I shouldn't stop it there. But what he's doing there is he's turning, his guitar, the single instrument, into a complete, orchestral instrument. Because and when you say orchestra, you can't just think of it as a string section, horns, and percussion. Orchestrally means that it's actually a complex form in relationship, vertically, vertically speaking, it's up and down. So it has all these different levels and layers that are being played in there. He's using a percussion sense. He's using and bringing in, these lower sounds, these lower bass sounds. He's bringing in, all of these different elements and relationships to it, and he's doing it in a solo level. So you get the rhythm, you get the timbre, you get the melody, you get the harmony, you get everything that's done. That's an orchestra. That's orchestration when you have all the different levels of music that are working, in conjunction with each other. They work. Do I dare, use the pun? They work in concert with each other, and so that's what he's doing with his guitar as a single instrument. That's what makes his arpeggiation, that he does. That's so prolific. The Eddie Van Halen arpeggio style. So listen just a little bit more. And just to make sure you don't forget that you're what you're listening to, that's why he throws in the distortion and everything at the very end of it, right? So he sets it up, and this is why it's such a great example to use for this, because the aesthetic relationship of it hits on all these different levels. He's bringing in and employing what would be, tidbits and samples, if you will, from a classical musical genre, because he's troping on, these different, this really standard structure and cell from musical elements, and he's bringing it in and he's putting it into this, rock, hard rock. Now it's even considered classical rock because of the agency of time, into that profile and model. And so when he brings back the distortion at the very end, is to remind you that, oh, you this is where you're listening to. So he walks you through, this relationship between rock and classical music, which is what Grosky is talking about. And then with the ruins example, they're walking you through an evolution of rock history just by bass and drums. And so their sense of an aesthetic relationship, and value, is heightened up, not only because of its artistic value, but also because it's based upon a knowledge of rock history and its music, and what they selected, because they wrote it, what they selected to be the hallmarks and yeah, the tied true testimonies of what it is, that makes up rock and hard rock's history. That's what they put together. How many bands could you name inside of there? I mean, they cover everything from King Crimson, Black Sabbath. They cover Cream. Blue Oyster Cult is in there. It's they just go on, with all these different these different, trips with it. I lost track after five. I get that far, and I can't even keep up with it. So they both work. The examples are there, and there's a relationship between them, is because they're both exposing, two different ways of looking at the aesthetics of rock and rock's value. But then the proverbial question comes back, is like, well, then where is the line, and where is it, and is it even necessary to tease out, to qualify, or to codify a relationship between what is rock music, what would be considered like a standardized rock music, an alternative rock music, a hard rock music, and then where does it go for looking at heavy metal, and then its purveyors going forward from there. Is it an awesome article? And these examples are like fantastic. So I'm going to drop them in the notes and everything for you, so that way you have them. And if anything comes up, just shoot me an email. All right, I'll talk to you all soon. Thanks.